Voyage.
Meta AI is the personal AI to help you with whatever you need. Plus, it meets you where you are. Not only is Meta AI now an app, but it's also on the apps you already know and love: Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger. Plus the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. It's easy to access wherever you are. So whether you're talking or texting, Meta AI is convenient to use throughout your day. Experience our newest AI that's tailored to you by downloading the Meta AI app. Try the Meta AI app today on the Apple App Store and Google Play.
The #1 selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, onabotulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Imagine this. The best pasta sauce you have ever tasted sits abandoned on a plate. Wasted sauce. That is a tragedy. If only you had used Barilla al Bronzo pasta. Its bronze-cut texture holds your sauce and scoops up every last drop. The Italians call that scarpetta. Capture sauce the Italian way. Barilla al Bronzo. Click or tap the banner to find out more.
Contractor Damon Gilliland wrote this in the Draper City Police Report as his statement about the crime. I'm working in the Richards home doing hardwood flooring. The husband stayed in the home all day while the wife was off at work. He, the husband, worked on his computer all day within eyeshot of me the whole time I was in their home. I left at 2:25 to pick my son up from school and drop him at his great-grandmother's while the husband went to get tile samples. Once I returned at 4:15, he was home and continued to work on his computer. As the day continued, I noticed the husband was away and out of sight. Later on, I heard loud voices upstairs, but I assumed it was the husband watching TV with the sound cranked up. I continued to staple flooring down and had earplugs in, and heard popping upstairs. I stopped what I was doing, yanked out my earplugs, and heard an animal-like bellowing. The husband seemed to be medicated, so I assumed he might be epileptic and was having a seizure. I then heard more popping, and the bellowing started to dissipate. I yelled, "Is everything okay up there?" And there was a single pop and total silence.
So late August, 5 weeks before she died, we were in California together. We spent a week together. We actually stayed at a gal's house. She lived in Hermosa, and she had a small suite. And Lynn and I stayed there. And this gal, Patty, I think her first name was, Patty was a best friend of Dan's, Lynn's husband.
I should mention here that we tried to find Patty's contact information and reach out to her, ultimately finding an email for her where our message came back as undeliverable. We were unable to connect with her so she could be interviewed for this podcast.
So we stayed there. We had a great time together. She was an adorable girl, really a lot of fun. She had been at the wedding. And again, she was one of Dan's closest friends. I think she may have been a work colleague or something for a while. But anyway, we stayed there. At this point, we're talking quite a bit about, how unhappy she is. And this has been, the topic of conversation most of our days together, as well as mine. I was also pretty unhappy. So we were talking about our marriage woes and that kind of thing, and the problems we were having and what we were hoping for. And this is when I do have this conversation with her about, I'm married a long time. I've got kids. I have more invested. You're not that invested. Maybe it's time for you to just think about packing it up and going. But, You have to try to do this without a lot of drama. This guy isn't going to react well if if there's a lot of drama. And I remember, saying goodbye to her. The last time I saw her and saying goodbye to her was at this backyard fence. And that was the day that I had asked her, what do you want to happen? And she said, what I want is for it to work. So I told her, if she needed me, if she was going to, if you need me to come out, I'll come out. I'll help you. I'll come out, fly out, and help you pack or whatever you think you need. And that was that. Now she went back and she started having work done on her house. And she was having a carpenter there, which was driving him crazy. Just this guy working at the house all day. He was sanding floors and all that sort of thing. This was really getting him very edgy, and they were beginning to quarrel quite a bit. So I think she came back from her trip probably being a little pumped from, girl time together, where she feels a little strengthened about the idea of like maybe getting out, She's not quite so broken down as one can be when you're in a shitty situation and that's all you're doing. So she was a little pumped up as I was after being together. I spoke to her almost every day, every other day. So we had just spoken and talked about how he was ready for the carpenter to get out of the house. He was sick of listening to the guy working all day long. I don't know, he was doing little repairs of wood or tile or something all over the place. And he was now working on the foyer. So the house was disruptive with saws and tables and all that stuff all over. How are things? The same, Now he's really frustrated because this guy's here. It's driving him crazy. That kind of normal talk, yeah.
After Damon, the contractor, heard those loud popping sounds and then total silence, his statement continues. The pops started at about 5:45 or 6 p.m., and the last one was at about 6:15 p.m. I wrapped up my job site about 6:30 p.m. and left. I immediately text messaged my boss, Sean McMurray, and told him what happened and that I thought that we should call the police. We discussed what the possibilities were and thought it'd be extreme for it to be gunshots.
And he calls his boss and says, I think something just went down. I think somebody got shot over there. And his boss says, oh my God, give me a break. Just do your job. This shit happens all the time. He says, well, I heard this moaning. Oh, maybe they're having kinky sex up there or something. Just do your job. Stay out of it. Don't worry about it.
In the deputy report, there are notes about the police's interview with Damon, which reads as follows. Damon said he has been doing hardwood floors for almost 10 years, and he's heard a lot of crazy things. Damon said people have weird boundaries where they'll do things while he is in their home, and it's strange. Damon said he wrapped up all his tools and everything. Damon said when he went outside where his saws were, he heard a window upstairs open, and he didn't look up there, but that reassured him that his imagination was running with him. The deputy report goes on to add, Damon said there are a lot of strange things out there, so maybe it was sexual, and that Damon said his boss put him at ease, thinking that maybe it was just some weirdos, and to write it off and see what happens in the morning. But Damon didn't write it off. As he says in his statement to the police, I talked to some people about what I heard and came to the conclusion it'd be best if I called the police to check it out. I did so about 8 to 9 p.m., described what I heard to the non-emergency Draper police line, and they dispatched officers to check it out. They called me a little later and told me they knocked on doors, peeked in windows, but turned nothing up. I called Lynn, got her voicemail, and told her about my progress, when I'd be back the next day. This was frustrating to hear. Why had the police not entered the home? I reached out to the Draper Police Department, but after letting me know almost everyone who investigated this was no longer with the department, they did not respond to a request for an interview about this case. So I spoke to several retired law enforcement officers about the case to get their perspective.
Danny R. Smith, and I am a retired LA County Sheriff's homicide detective and author of detective novels and former private investigator. I worked at homicide for 7 years. I was with the Sheriff's Department for 21, and then I had a 18-year career in private investigation. The first domestic murder that I handled as a street cop was a little bit different than what someone would most likely think of as a traditional domestic violence type murder. And basically this was more the other typical, if I can't have her, nobody's going to. And an estranged common law husband murdered his wife outside of her place of business. And that's a case that, it was the second murder case that I was working, or that I was assigned to as a patrol deputy, and I'd only been out on the streets for, probably a month and a half, and that was pretty impactful. And the level of violence and the amount of rage that you could see in the crime scene was starkly different than what you'd see in, other types of murders, gang violence, etc. So that was something that you learned early on, and it made an impact. It definitely drove home a point.
I also spoke to Mike Marty of the Retired Investigators Guild, also known as the RIG.
So my name is Mike Marty. I am a retired chief investigator from the Douglas County District Attorney's Office in Nevada. And I am now the CEO of the Retired Investigators Guild, or more commonly known as the RIG. Yeah, over 20 years. I worked the first part of my career in the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office in California, and then later moved to Nevada, where I was the state's lead homicide detective for the state police of Nevada, and then recruited to be the chief investigator for the Douglas County District Attorney's Office. Then in 2018, I retired, and shortly thereafter, I founded the Retired Investigators Guild.
Mike echoed Danny's comments about the nature of the violence when it comes to domestic murder.
I was very hyper-focused on a thing called the cycle of domestic violence. And it looks like a wheel. And in the center of that wheel are the words power and control. And that's what the suspect in the case, whether it's a man or a woman, their focus is on power and control over the victim. So they do things like intimidating them. They use emotional abuse. They isolate them from their friends. They do a lot of things. And then when they commit the act, where they hit them for the first time or they choke them for the first time, they try to minimize that, deny that they've actually done that, and then blame the victim. I wouldn't have had to do this if you would have. And that's the suspect's control over the victim with the minimizing, denying, and blaming piece, where he or she convinces the victim that the only reason that I'm hitting you is because I drank. And that could be the accepted norm for that couple. So, if I stop drinking, then I won't hit you. Where that's rarely the case, because A, they're not going to stop drinking or using the substance that helps them become the abuser, but also it's built inside them that they are the abuser. And that power and control that the suspect has over the victim is very, very powerful. They use things like economic abuse and isolation specifically to pull them away from their friends. Whereas I'm sure most of your listeners are like, well, my friend would have, told me to, leave this guy. But I would then ask them the question of, how many times have you had a friend tell you, hey, you shouldn't be with this guy, and you stay with them? Non-abusive, just a poor decision, right? And so, watching that evolve in my career, I could almost insert into a case wherever the case was and know where the victim was in that power and control wheel. Oh yeah, you're definitely in the emotional abuse phase, or you're definitely in the isolation phase, or he's definitely using economic abuse against you right now because you've gotten married and he's controlling the finances and he's not allowing you to have access to funds in order to make your escape. And then when children get involved, it's very difficult for victims to separate, because then they think, maybe I'm okay on my own, but now I have 2 or 3 or 4 kids. How am I going to support these children when I've been isolated, when I've been emotionally abused, when I've been, when I don't have access to funds? In my experience, it's never been the snap of the finger from, meeting to homicide.
Danny felt the police response to domestic violence had evolved over time because of one especially high-profile case.
When I was working the streets, it was prior to the Nicole Simpson murders. And, quite frankly, back then, there was more leeway in dealing with domestic violence. Right or wrong, the way we handled it was you tried to resolve it for the time being, whether it was, someone needs to leave for the night till everyone calms down and cooler heads prevail, or work out some other type of a situation. And the reason for that was notoriously, when you arrested someone for domestic violence, the other party would end up refusing to prosecute. So it just kind of bogged down the whole system and seemed to be a waste of time. So, back in the 80s, it was, there had to be significant violence before someone went to jail. If you got there and there were no signs of violence, and she says, well, he knocked me into the wall and pulled my hair, then you would simply ask, do you want him to go to jail? And 9 out of 10 times they'd say, no, I don't want him to go to jail. He's my baby's daddy, So back then, you wouldn't necessarily arrest someone for the allegation of domestic violence, again, unless there was significant trauma and the party was willing to prosecute. The O.J. Simpson case changed all of that because, quite frankly, there had been a history of domestic violence between O.J. Simpson and Nicole Brown. And those instances of domestic violence were kind of brushed under the rug. And so, when someone ends up being murdered, especially in a case that's that significant and, newsworthy, then things start changing across the board for law enforcement, and it became a thing where any allegation of domestic violence at all, they went to jail. And so a lot of times both parties went to jail. Well, she shoved me and then I, grabbed her and pushed her over the couch. Okay, well, you're both going to jail, domestic violence. And the cases would probably, most of the time, never go anywhere, but you still had to do it because you had to, if nothing else, you're covering your own ass, because you can't just walk away from a domestic violence situation and take a chance that, he's going to come back and kill her that night.
But in carefully reading over the police report, I noticed something curious, which maybe speaks to things not changing that much. Nicole Brown Simpson was murdered in 1994. Lynn was murdered in 2007. Sergeant Kurt Imig wrote in the deputy report that en route to the crime scene, he had the records clerk look up previous cases involving this residence and, quote, had her read the narrative of a previous call to the home over the phone. I was unaware the police had been previously called to the home, which is what this note in the report implies. It's not elaborated upon anywhere else, nor did anyone else I spoke to indicate the police had previously been called. So I asked Danny Smith via email. This is what he responded. You are most likely correct that there had been a call for service, yet no action was taken, and there was no arrest or formal report of the incident. We can only speculate as to what the circumstances of that were. As for the initial response, where the cops came and didn't enter the house, this is how Danny explained it.
Probably it may have been as simple as there was a check the welfare, and the house was secure. They couldn't see anything by looking through windows, and you can't just enter people's homes. There's the whole Fifth Amendment issue that you can't just enter unless there's some reasonable suspicion that someone is in danger or a crime is being committed or has been committed.
So the night passes and Damon goes back in the morning. His statement reads, I arrived at about 8:45 a.m., knocked on the door, rang the doorbell repeatedly. I called Lynn 2 times, left messages. I called Sean, that's Damon's boss. I called Sean and told him I was worried about the whole situation. He came and we both opened the door and repeatedly yelled, "Hello, flooring guys," to no response. I called 911 and requested police and medical help. The deputy report notes that an officer, Deutsch, arrived on the scene with officers Starkey, Lease, and Hill. They entered through the unlocked front door. Officer Starkey noted he called out, saying, "Draper City Police, announce your presence if you are in the house," several times. Hill and Lease cleared the downstairs area. Starkey and Deutsch checked upstairs. The report says, "We searched all the rooms from the stairs to the north in systematic fashion. We got to the room farthest north from the stairs and had a little yellow note stating not to let the cats out." Officer Starkey noted that he opened the door to the bedroom by using his foot to push the door lever down. He wrote in his report that he saw 2 sets of legs laying on the floor next to the bed, and noticed the man had a small silver handgun in his right hand, and that a small black and silver handgun was on the floor in between the 2 bodies. There was blood splatter on the wall behind the bed and some of the ceiling above the doorway to the room. There were bullet casings on the floor. Notably, the female was laying on her back with her head partially propped up against the wall. She was between the bed and a nightstand. The man was laying on his left side, facing the woman.
They find them both dead. And ceremoniously somewhat, she is lying on the fancy bed pillows up against the wall between the king bed and the nightstand. And he's kind of positioned her some way. And then he's shot himself and laid on top of her. And then he positions her on the floor, puts these pillows and everything behind her, and then he puts the gun in his mouth and shoots himself in the mouth. I think he just was sort of trying to be ceremonious. I'm sure he was, in a very emotional state, I suppose. I don't know what the pillows are about, whether he was doing it to prepare himself or why he ceremoniously laid on top of her. I really don't know. I don't have an opinion about it, other than I think it was as peculiar as you think.
The answer might be in Dan's own writing. Also in the police report is the account of Detective Olson. He notes that he photographed the crime scene. At one point, he moved into the kitchen and saw a yellow 8.5 by 11-inch lined sheet of paper with a handwritten note on it. This is what the note read: "I love Lynn with all my heart. I love my kids totally. I can't go on. I wanted to be so much more for Lynn and give so much as well. I let her down. I let the kids down. Lynn, the church is true." On the next episode, the police's investigation of the crime scene paints a clear picture of Dan and Lynn's final moments, as a strange narrative emerges from Dan's family, according to Rebecca Scheinberg, insisting that this was an accident. That's next time. My Best Friend's Killer is a production of Voyage Media. The series is produced by Nat Mundell, Robert Midas, Dan Benamore, and Caitlin Brown. Executive produced by Marilyn Hotz. Reported, written, and lead produced by Dan Benamore. Edited, sound designed, and mixed by Nick Misitti. Original music by Derlis Gonzalez. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you're listening, and subscribe now for future episodes.